Oh, perfect. So again, thank you so much for joining us all today for the Quorum Speaker Series. I'm Diane Silverman. I'm the Executive Director of Quorum. And we are absolutely delighted to have Melinda Martin talking to us today about leadership and how to lead. Melinda's a world-traveling executive coach with experience at major corporations and large nonprofits. She helps leaders focus amid the constant flow of crises and activities in today's fast-paced world. If you haven't had a chance to check out her website, I highly recommend it. Her blog is fascinating and insightful. I'll include a link to it in our follow-up email. Our moderator today, Marta Hill-Gray, is one of Quorum. We're very lucky to have her as an advisory board member for Quorum. She's also the co-founder of the Menopause Hormone Project. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Marta. And thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Diane. Welcome, everybody. I am so selfish because I love talking to my friend Melinda, and I always walk away or drive away. It's usually in the car these days, but I call her in crises, as I have done for our 30-year friendship at least. And she is the most level-headed, smart, capable human I know. So when I get emotional, she's very pragmatic, and that keeps me grounded. So we have known each other for a very long time, and I'm delighted to share her with you. Melinda, welcome. And maybe you could start with telling us a little bit about your background. I think that'll give everyone context to sort of know your journey through your career and the various organizations you've worked for and how they've shaped you.
Sure. Thank you, Marta. Let me start by just saying how delighted I am to be here today. I don't usually do this type of webinar, and so I'm excited to see all of your faces and to learn a little more about your background. Marta and Diane have shared with me the focus of Quorum and some of the things that you're interested in. And so my hope is that our conversation today will be insightful to you, enlightening, remind you of what you already know in many ways. And we'll talk about that as we go through things. So my background has covered a number of different jobs, as probably most of yours have. I came out of university with a degree in economics, and to the dismay of my father, started a job in retail and moved through the ranks of retail at large department stores, specialty stores, always in the communications area. So public relations, media relations, doing fashion shows, doing special events, doing things that would bring customers into the store and shaping the brand reputation of the store. So I started at a little company in California called Bullocks Wilshire. It was bought up by iMagnin. I eventually moved to Robinsons May. That was bought up by Macy's. And as you know, these days, every retailer has been bought by Macy's. And so that's where I ended up for most of my career. At the age of 50, I decided that I needed to shift gears, and I moved to Time Warner Cable and into the entertainment industry. Again, in a communications role, I did corporate social responsibility across the country and did communications and media relations, which for those of you who still have cable, is a fraught industry in terms of reputation. And so after that, Comcast eventually, or Spectrum eventually bought Time Warner Cable, and that was my chance to raise my hand for the severance package that sent me off into a different future. And I ended up going to the nonprofit sector. I had worked with nonprofits for most of my career, usually giving some kind of funding or working with them on special events or as an audience for a fashion show. And that was really an eye-opener to see the inside workings of a nonprofit and just how challenging it is as an environment. Very different from the corporate world and very difficult, probably one of the most difficult jobs I had. And eventually I got to a point where my parents needed caregiving, and I had to step away from that role. I was chief operating officer for United Way of Greater Los Angeles, and stepped away from that to take care of my parents in their time of need. And when that cycle was completed, I started an executive coaching business, which just sort of happened to coincide with the pandemic, if you will. I started my business in November of 2019, and obviously in March of 2020, everything changed. And so really just stopped meeting with people in person and took it virtual, which allowed me to have clients from all over the place, which I found really fascinating to see different ways that organizations operate, different ways that culture affects the business environment, if you will. So that is what I'm doing today. I'm doing executive coaching, and I love working with individuals to help them get what they want out of the workplace, if you will, and feel authentic in the workplace. We will talk today a lot about values and values-based leadership, and that is really where I come from in terms of how we show up inside the workplace. So thank you,
Great,
Marta.
thanks. And tying into that, we had talked about personal values and how to live your values, and certainly in the workplace, how important that is. And one of the things that I know many of us struggle with is time management.
Mhm.
And when we spoke earlier about this, you'd mentioned that part of leadership, great leadership, is time management. Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah. I think the word I probably hear the most from all of my clients, as well as my friends, and certainly, my daughter and her friends, is everybody feels overwhelmed. That's the word I hear all the time. The information is coming in too much. Everybody has too many meetings. Everybody has too much to do. The email is exploding. The Slack is exploding. The texting is exploding. Everybody feels pulled in too many directions. And then, of course, at the same time, you're trying to have a life outside of work, which often gets short shrift, if you will, in our busy world. So time management is something that we have to all actively be involved with. And what I find is, it really all comes down to your values. And when we talk about leadership, leading yourself, leading others, being a leader in your organization, being a leader in your community, it comes down to your values and what you value, right? What you believe in, what you want to make happen, how you want to operate in this world. And, there are many processes for which you can go through to identify what are your core values. But where the rubber meets the road is how you behave, if you will. You can say you value kindness, for example, but if you aren't kind to people, or you aren't kind to yourself, then your behavior and your values are out of alignment. And one of the books I've read called Spark calls that the say-do gap. And I like that expression, right? In that you're saying one thing, but you're doing another. And for those of you who, have children, that your child will pick up on that instantly. I repeat it back to them, Mommy, you said blah, 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 as you do something entirely different. And it's the same really in the workplace. And you're trying to build trust with your team and a sense of cohesion. They are watching for your say-do gap. So your consistency in your values is important. It's not enough just to identify your values. You need to actually live them in the way you make decisions. And so going back to time management, that is a barometer that I use in setting my time, is how am I allocating my time so that I am living my values? And, there are tools that can help you with your calendar and all the rest of it. But I find for me, what works best is I have to put my values into my calendar first. So if, for example, I value waking up in the morning and having an hour of quiet time, I have to put that in the calendar every day. It's sort of, and if your calendar is shared with your colleagues or whatever, you can put it as a private thing. They don't have to see what you're doing. But I pre-block that time, and I'm just not available. For other people, it may be, I don't know, some people need to take a break at lunch. Certainly when I was working, if I didn't plan for lunch, I was either eating at my desk while on a conference call, or I wasn't eating, because everybody would book up every available second of my day, and that would be it. So I had to go into the calendar and actually create a 30-minute break at lunchtime so that I could take lunch. Whether I ate or not was up to me, but I needed the time to break from everything else. So if you think of time management as a way for you to prioritize what you value, whether it's personal, professional, with your family, with your community, whatever it is, it helps you organize your calendar a little bit. And those things that come in that are not in alignment with your values, you don't need to say yes to. We often think as women that we have to say yes to everything. Oh, we got a meeting invite, surely we have to accept. I invite you to pause for a minute and consider whether you really do. So I hope that helps.
And then let's talk about creating a better relationship with your boss. So we talked about sort of leadership and managing up. So I would like you to talk about that, but I also would like to talk about male versus female bosses and sort of gender and leadership and the idea of being a good girl and being the nice one and doing it because who else is going to do it if I don't? I'm
Right.
going to do that from time to time.
Right. Without a doubt, your relationship with your boss is probably the most important relationship that will determine the trajectory of your career, right? If you have a strong relationship with your boss and your boss is a good boss, they can support you and sponsor you as you move up the ladder. If you have a difficult relationship with your boss, that's probably not what's going to happen out of that. And so I always say we don't need to like our boss. Right? That is kind of an irrelevant point in the workplace. What we do need to do is realize that this is a relationship that we need, a relationship we have to foster. We have to endorse the boss. We have to support the boss. We have to protect the boss in some regards, if that is going to help our career, right? And this is where, again, I lean into my values. There are ways to disagree with somebody that still allow you to show respect. There are ways to have a challenging conversation, if you will, that still allow you to show kindness. You have to think through, how do I manage this relationship that is so important in terms of my career, but which may not be an easy relationship. And I think in many ways, we know how to do this as women. We are, to Marta's point, when you say we're the good girl. But what that means to me is that we do know how to manage relationships. Certainly we manage them with our children, with our parents, with our siblings, with our friends, especially I think with our friends. There's times when you have to have a challenging conversation with a friend, because you care about that person. And if you see them doing something that is to their detriment, we summon the courage to have that conversation, even sometimes if it means the end of the friendship. Right? I'm sure many of you have had that sort of situation where you come to a point with a friend where you feel you have to say something and they may or may not be able to accept it at the time you say it, and the friendship may alter or even disappear. And you have to stand firm in the knowledge that you did the right thing for the person, right? That you were trying to help them. And so that mindset, which I think is actually summarized in a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott, who worked in the tech sector, is sort of summarized in the point of care deeply and challenge directly. And to manage those two things, and because you care deeply, you can challenge directly. And as you challenge directly, you show how much you care. And so it's a nice sort of infinity symbol to me, of going around in terms of that. And I think, as I say, we know how to do that in our personal lives many times. I'm sure for those of you who have children, especially if you have children who are strong-willed, shall we say, you've had to practice caring deeply and challenging directly. And we can bring that into the workplace and do the same. Even with our bosses sometimes. Marta, do you want me to go straight into the gendered piece of this?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I know we've all heard the messages: be nice, be kind, oh, just do it. Oh, sure you can, and the notion, because we are hard workers and we are diligent and we do care deeply, we all know that the busy, effective person is the one who gets the extra project, right? Because you'll get it done. And so I want to talk a little bit about delegation. I know many of you are part of a team. You have direct reports. You have people who you can delegate to, whether that is directly or indirectly. And, I think sometimes, certainly I think from my experience, the men I know have no problem with delegation whatsoever. They are happy to delegate. They do not even delegate indiscriminately. They just, take the work in and push it right back out the door. And I'm sure many of you know teams that are headed by a man where the team is working, 60 hours a week and he's on the golf course. So there is the male version of delegation. I am not advocating for that. I am advocating for the kind of delegation that sounds a little more like this, that you think of projects, tasks, not as you are imposing them on somebody else, but that you are offering them an opportunity to learn. And so I think sometimes as women, because we've had, we've had to carefully watch our backs, we've had to do more than maybe our fair share, and we protect our reputation inside the organization so strongly. We worry sometimes about giving a project to somebody else. We know that there's a little lack of trust there, a little concern that it might go sideways, and then there's also the notion that I know I'm good at that. And so I want to do that because that's where I shine, right? And so I'm going to invite you to sort of reconsider those 2 points of view and think about your team members as people just like you who want to learn and grow and maybe someday want to sit in your chair. And how can you foster them? How can you support them in their goals and their growth? And in some regards, that means giving them projects that maybe you're a little uncomfortable with them handling entirely, or they're a little uncomfortable with handling entirely. And, mentoring them through the process. And to give them projects that are aligned with their goals. So not just, the work you don't want to do, which is again, sometimes what I always felt like, when I had male bosses, that's what I was like, oh, you gave me this project because you didn't want to do it. Thanks a lot. But instead, maybe the project that you do want to do, the interesting project that sort of inspires you, share that with others on your team so that they can learn and grow. And I think that's a positive thing overall for you and for the team.
All right. Connecting with peers, so managing across. Can we talk about that? And you'd made a really good point about the pandemic and how Zoom impacted a lot of the relationships that happen at work, where you can drop into somebody's office and have a quick conversation that's transformational, but Zoom never really allowed that.
Indeed. When I joined Time Warner, it was the first time I had a team where members were located all over the US. And there were many that I'd never met before. And our conversations looked like this, in a screen full of images. And I really had to do a lot of work to figure out how to manage a virtual team. It's very different than managing an in-person team. You can't do that, stop by your office and how are things going? Anything I can help with, sort of question. It's just not an option. And so there are a number of good books and courses on how to be a virtual leader. And if you do have team members who are located in other cities than where you are located, I strongly recommend you take a look at those and figure out how to strengthen a connection with somebody who is not in the same place as you. I also, it's not always possible, but if it is possible, to make an in-person visit just even once, so you can sit in the same space and get to know each other and learn. So much is in body language and what you can't see. And so you see a head on the screen, and for all you know, they're engaged and interested. And down below the neck, God knows what's going on, right? Like they could be absolutely losing their mind and it's showing up in the way their legs are twitching, and you can't see that at all. And so meeting in person just makes a huge difference, always. But in this day of 360-degree feedback, a matrix organization, being asked to work a cross-functional team, etc., our relationships with our peers have become more important. And when I say peer, what I mean is, if I'm on the communications team and I have people under me and I have a boss above me, the person on the marketing team or the person on the product team or the sales team or the whatever team, those are my peers, right? The same level on an org chart as me, but a different function. And so those are the people that I need to partner with in order to get things done, right? There's very little that is done entirely within your own team these days. You always want a perspective of others in the organization. And so building a relationship with your peers is an important aspect of being a well-rounded leader. And there are certainly times, Marta will probably laugh at this, but in the retail world, when you're in the special events team, your reputation is pretty much you are the party people. You don't really think very strategically. You spend a lot of money. You don't do a lot of good. Sure, what you do is a lot of fun, but there's really no there, if you will, compared to I'm in the store, I'm in the buying office, or I'm in whatever. And so, you have, in thinking reputationally, because as I say, that's always been my job as a communicator, is to think about the reputation. I had to think about the reputation of our team inside the organization. And what was that reputation? Because what I didn't want my reputation to be was, oh, she's the party girl, right? That did not seem like a career enhancing definition of what my team did. And so, working across the organization with other functions and having to learn their language, having to learn what mattered to them, being able to talk, numbers and sales and finance and, all the rest of it, so that I could help them to understand that if they had a new product launch, for example, and they wanted to put that in a store, it mattered whether or not there was an event to bring customers in to show them this new product line or not. And so, you have to think how your peers can help you as you navigate what it is you're trying to do. Now, not all peers are friends. I have found, some peers, they might ignore you. They don't think your department or you are vital to their being. Some may compete with you. Only one of us is going to move up, and it's sure going to be not going to be you. Some of them may distract you. Those are the ones that, call you with something that has nothing to do with what you're working on and waste an hour of your time talking about, whining about this or that or the other thing. Some of them use you, they pass projects onto you. And some of them actually go so far as to sabotage you, where they really want that their perspective is the only way they get ahead is if you fall behind. And so, these are the sort of pitfalls, if you will, of the organization. And so if you do have those sorts of peers in your relationships and your company, some companies are a little more mean-spirited and cutthroat than others, shall we say. Some companies even foster that competitive spirit, I'll call it that. But what you need to do is to figure out, the peers that can offset that, because again, if we're thinking of your career and your mission and what you're trying to do, the chatter about you is important. And when it comes to brand reputation, you want to be ahead of that, not just to be, sort of a bystander and letting that happen. You want to actually help control that narrative. And so finding those peers who will elevate you and fostering those relationships is an important piece of your overall leadership puzzle.
One of the things we talked about was managing people who work for you. And my favorite thing that you mentioned the other day, and one thing I have to say to everybody is when Melinda was at the United Way and she was talking to staff or interviewing, one of her questions to an interviewee is, what are you curious about? I thought, that is such a great question. So I'm just going to leave you with that. But what are you curious about? I think it really informs a lot about that. So that's number one. But number two is asking people on your team, what is your job description? And I'm just going to let you state the obvious.
Yeah.
But I just think it's brilliant.
This is a hot button for me. Right?
I do.
Because this just hits my logical brain. First of all, let me step back 1 second and address curiosity. So one of the things that Marta and Diane and I have done, and we'll share with it at the end of the session, is to create a series of what I've called challenges for you. I know you are all go-getter women who like, if you're going to attend a webinar, you want something to do at the end of it that makes you feel like you've made progress. And so I've developed a series of sort of exercises that you can consider to think about some of the things we talk about today and how you might personalize them for yourself. And so one of them is to actually identify your top 5 values, so that you can be real clear on that idea of behavior, what are my behavior, and put those values first. And so one of my values is curiosity. I am an intensely curious person, often to my detriment, of going into the, oh, what is that dark room over there in this old, castle? And then I walk in and of course it's full of bats, like type of thing. So it doesn't always work to my favor. But as a curious person, I ask that of other people. I just want to know what makes you curious, because in my mind, at least, if you aren't a curious person, that is going to show up in the workplace in a very interesting way, right? And for somebody who is all about communications, a lack of curiosity is going to be a really interesting way of navigating the communications field, because we ask a lot of questions, right? That's the way it goes. Anyway, back to job description. So Marta knows this is one of my hot button issues, and I have used it throughout my career, because in the corporate world, what I found is you always had a job description, right? It was there. It was pretty clear when you went through your performance appraisal. There was a section that was based on how well you were doing your job description. There wasn't necessarily any ambiguity about what you were supposed to be doing. And then I went to the nonprofit sector, and I found that most people did not have a job description at all. And they did whatever came their way, whatever they were asked to do. And I thought, well, hold on. If we are going to be evaluated on a system that talks about expectations, if you will, does not meet expectations, meets expectations, exceeds expectations, which is the norm for a performance review process, how do I know what you expect of me if I have nothing to rely on, right? I need clarity that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then I know whether I am on the right track for expectations or not. But if I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm just supposed to be doing whatever gets thrown my way, I don't know what the expectations are. So I'm really pretty no nonsense about the idea that we need a clear job description. And obviously we live in a never-changing world, and so that job description needs to be updated at times and needs to morph, and there's always something in it that says other duties as needed, right? That's always there as a catch-all for the odd project that has to come your way. But what I don't like is when it's all duties as needed, and that's all, right? Which in some cases that seems to be, the jobs are so ill-defined. The idea of it to me is that you are an organization and you have a function that needs to be done, right? That's the job description. Different people will sit in that role over the course of time, but it's based on a function, not on a person. Now, the job description might get amended because a person has a certain skill set. They then get added into the job description. But that's a conversation between you and your boss and sort of figuring out what things, what's what. And for you as a leader, your team members need that clarity of a job description, because that is your expectations, right? In other words, this person reports to me and this is what I expect them to be doing, right? Then they're real clear on what their job function is. How they do it, right, then becomes the interesting conversation with them on a regular basis. How are you getting your job done? Are you forming partnerships? Are you, enhancing the work that we're trying to do? Are you comfortable? Are you enjoying the work, right? Like those questions that allow a person to grow, allow a person to be retained, allow talent to develop. That's all in the how, not the what, if you will. I'm sure many of you, like me, have taken a job that maybe at the beginning you were, maybe you were moved over there within your organization, whatever happened, you may be a little hesitant about, do I have the skills to do this job? Am I going to enjoy this job? I'm not sure. This isn't where I saw my career going, but this is where the company has placed me. And as long as you've got a leader who lets you learn, grow, and supports you in that, I have found that you can move your career in some interesting ways when you sort of stop trying to control it so narrowly, if you will. So yeah, that's my point on the job description. I'd just be curious. I know I can only see some of you, but I'd love to just see whether it's a show of hands or you're pushing the button. How many of you right now have a clear job description? So we're at about a third. Okay, work to be done.
Well, and it feels sort of like a setup if you don't have a good job description, because how can you be evaluated and how can you possibly be successful
Exactly.
if you're not aligned with the
Right.
expectation
Well,
versus what you're trying to do?
And are you doing double work with somebody else? Are you, you know,
Right.
are there, as the leader of that team, one of your functions is to make sure that everything the team needs to do is getting done, right?
Right.
And if you've got 3 team members and they don't have a job description, how do you even know that? Right? Who's doing that certain project? Oh, Lisa she wrote her position description. I give a big thumbs up on that, right? There are times where, you know, there just isn't, well, first of all, you were hired for a position, so there was a job description at some point, right? Something had to be posted for you to apply to. And so that is the starting point. I always laugh when people say, oh, I don't have a job description. I'm like, wait, you only started 3 months ago. You must, right? There must be one because you applied to something. And at least that's a starting point. Now, once you get into the job, you may realize, you know, there's some things about this job description that maybe, you know, are out of date or could be, you know, could be amended, whatever. And that's your role as an executive to raise that. And so, you know, to my mind, the performance review time is the perfect time to do this, not at the review, but as you start the process, right? Of let's review my job description and make sure that over the course of the year, something hasn't changed, right? So that we're reviewing me on what is accurate and up to date.
Right. Next question is, when you, with your coaching clients, how do you counsel them to engage and you know, build consensus with the team and that kind of thing? What did I say? Yeah. How do you coach your clients to engage and rally supporters? And how do you suggest they move people along?
When you say move people along, how do you mean? Do
Well,
you
in
mean
their
move them
careers,
up,
you know,
move them out,
yeah,
or any of the above?
right. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, obviously when you are coaching a team, you've got lots of different personalities, you've got lots of different backgrounds, you've got lots of differences between people. And your role, as I see it, is to help people step into their full potential, right? In some cases that may be on your team, in some cases that may eventually be off your team, right? To me, it doesn't matter. As women, you know, we are nurturers by our very nature. And, you know, when I think about the attitude that we bring to the workplace of this notion of, I care deeply about you and your success. Please tell me what your goals are, because what I want to do is help you get there. Right. And what does that look like? Oh, you're interested in taking on this. Let's look at training opportunities for you. You know, oh, this is one part of your job that you don't like. That's an interesting one, because on the career path you're currently on, you're going to be doing that for a long time. So let's decide whether or not, you know, you need to adapt where you want to take your career. And to have these honest conversations that, as I say, I know we know how to do because we do them with our friends all the time, right? All the time. And I just invite you to bring that same wisdom and compassion into the workplace, so that the people who report to you can clearly see that you want them to be successful. That is what builds trust and consistency, even in times when, you know, organizations are going through rapid change. And certainly in today's workplace, there are a lot of controversial topics, and there are a lot of times where people are, and certainly, you know, where you can, having a strong partner in the human resources team, if you have one. If you don't have a strong human resources team, because maybe you work for a small organization or it's just not a function, you know, I encourage you to find somebody outside of your organization who understands the legal aspects of employee relations, so you don't inadvertently step into something that you then are struggling to get yourself out of. But I also encourage you not to be afraid of what I call, you know, a challenging conversation. You know, if we come to those conversations with respect, with a sense of dignity for all, with the ability to listen, to really talk through it. You know, my favorite phrases are "help me understand" or "tell me more." You know, those things that draw somebody out so that you can really, when somebody does something and you are confused by it, you know, your thinking is different. Help me understand, you know, where you come from. Help me understand why you think that way. Help me understand where that leads you, or why that perspective seems like the right one to you, because I think differently, but I want to understand your personal point of view. And so having those rich conversations that open doors and build trust and allow for really a respectful conversation between two individuals who have many similarities and many differences is an important part of leadership. And so as we look at again, I'll go back to time management, as we look at our calendar, building in time for those important conversations, even though they may, one thing I hear all the time is, it's just so much easier for me to do it myself. It's faster. I'll just do it myself. And I compare this to the toddler who has a pacifier in their mouth, right? Okay, yeah, it's easier just to give the toddler the pacifier. Just keep giving the toddler a pacifier. And at what point are you going to take it away? Because every year you wait, it becomes harder to take the pacifier away until maybe they're 8 when they decide to throw it in the trash on their own, right? Because they got teased at school or something, right? But it's far easier to address, a behavior that you might hope to moderate in somebody early on, rather than to let it just continue to slide.
Pacifier.
And you're doing them a favor. That's the important thing. You're doing it because you care and you want them to be successful.
One of the things that to me is your great strength is you're a very rational person. And I tend to have a little bit more exposed emotion, and you have talked me off the cliff more than once. And so for those of us that have a little bit more emotion, what suggestions do you have for those of us to kind of pull back and have a more rational view? And I will remind you of a couple of things you said that I think are really great, which is when somebody comes to you with something that, good idea, not now, and or not ever, and why. And I'm sure we've all had that where somebody's like, oh my gosh, this is just going to be the greatest thing ever. And then, just being able to shut that down in a way or mitigate that somehow so that you, keep things going, don't hurt feelings, but
right.
Stay in command of the situation.
Right. Well, first of all, let me say that, while I know I show up sometimes at work as the voice of calm and rational thought, you only have to ask my adult children how rational I am sometimes to know that it's a face I can put on. Let's
right. Don't be fooled.
Right. It's not always there. Let me first address the when somebody comes to you with a brilliant idea, right? That is perhaps either, not a brilliant idea or a distraction or something that, is not part of your strategic vision for the team at the moment. I am a believer, you never want to shut down creativity. For somebody who comes up with an idea, however misguided it may be, right? You never want to leave them feeling that they shouldn't bring you an idea, right? Because one day they might bring you 20 ridiculous ideas, and then the 21st one you're going to be going, oh my God, mind blown with that idea. So you want to, those are your idea generators. They're valuable to your team. You want to keep them, but you also need to help them learn how to think through an idea in a more strategic, analytical way, right? Because maybe they come to you with an idea that you're thinking, oh, that's great, except that'll cost us, $20,000 out of my budget that I don't have, or whatever, right? And so again, taking the time to help them understand, let's walk through this idea. It's an interesting idea. Let's walk through it. Tell me what issue do you think you're solving with this idea? Or what are you trying to do with this idea? And how do you think that idea would play out? Who else do we need to be successful with that idea? What resources are necessary to do with that idea? And let's look at the results. Let's assume we could do it. We find the resources and we do it and we're successful. Where does it take us? You're helping them think through the whole process, in other words, not just the initial idea. And that's why sometimes I say, it's a good idea and we're not going to do that now, right? Because we have other priorities on our plate. I don't want to shelve that entirely because yes, it is a good idea, but right now we don't have the resources or the capacity to do it. We're focused on these other things. So I'm just going to kind of put that in, my back, and you have to actually do this, I am a great one for keeping notes. And so I keep a note file on each of my employees, right? And so a good idea gets something that gets referenced again at some point. A year ago, you brought me this really interesting idea and we said not now, then, but I think it might be the time to revisit it, right? So, I mean, that's one where when you do that, an employee usually is just shocked. Shocked that you remembered it, shocked that you remembered it came from them, shocked that they're ready, that you're saying, okay, now's the time. And so, yeah, let me take that from an emotional standpoint, because Marta, that was your initial question. So I like to think of it as sort of two sides of a coin, if you will. When something comes to you, you have an opportunity to react to it. That's an immediate response, often emotional, right? You're busy, you're tired, and somebody walks in with something and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe you just brought this to me, and you react to it emotionally. I encourage you to temper that a little bit and instead to respond to something. There's a difference between a reaction and a response. Sometimes I think that we believe that when somebody brings you something, a question or whatever, you have to answer it immediately. As the boss, you're supposed to know everything, aren't you? Like, come in and answer. But I actually find that most employees would rather have a correct answer than a quick answer. And so you are given the grace to buy yourself time. Oh, you bring up an interesting point. I want to do a little research on that. Can I get back to you next week? Those types of things that allow you to, or even just to say, I'm in the middle of something right now, and I know what you're saying to me is important, but honestly, my ears are not on. And so I want to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow and we can go over it. Is that okay? Those things that buy you the grace of time to be able to, in some cases, if somebody brings you something, you have to check with HR, you have to check with legal, you need to check with the sales team, you need to, run it by, you need to just sit with it even within yourself. Sometimes, what do I think about that? Not when you're in the midst of another project, but when maybe it's on your drive home, maybe it's when you're doing your exercise or you're cooking dinner, maybe it's as you're getting into bed, whatever. You have to find your own time where you can think about it rationally, not emotionally, right? And look, it would be nice if everybody brought something to you at a point when you were ready to receive it. Right? Okay, I'm ready. Come into me with your good ideas. But usually they walk in when you're in the midst of something, you're thinking and you're whatever, and they walk in, do you have a second? You're like, oh my God, no, I don't have a second, but there you are. And so how do you treat the person that's coming in with respect and dignity, because every human being deserves that, and at the same time protect yourself? Right? And treat yourself with the same respect and dignity to say, I'm in the middle of a project right now. I would love to hear what you have to say to me. Can it wait? Right? Is a perfectly acceptable thing to say, to buy yourself that time to let the emotions subside.
That's great. Appreciate it. Tell us a little bit. I want to save some time for some questions, but I do want to know, tell us a bit about your coaching clients and kind of what are the challenges that they're facing? I'm guessing it won't be unlike any of the stuff all of us are facing, but can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. It's not. The challenges that I find my coaching clients face are the same as the employees, that I worked with in the corporate world, in the nonprofit world. I'm sure they're the same challenges that each of you faces. For the most part, my coaching clients are usually, fairly high up in their organization. They have direct reports. They may not be the CEO or the executive director of a nonprofit. So they often have a boss, and or the board is their boss, depending on the type of organization. So one is a small business, runs her own business, which is interesting for me. But they are often people, and I think this is so common, who have not had good leaders in their life, right? They have not been fortunate enough to have a boss that they can look to as a role model and learn from. And I must admit, I didn't have that until I was 50. Marta's heard all the horror stories of my terrible bosses through the years. God knows retail is riddled with them, type of thing. And so it was only when I started a new job at 50 that I was like, oh, Now this person gets it. This is somebody I can learn from. This is somebody I can mimic, I can copy, I can talk to about this. You know, what a gift. We're not all that lucky in our careers because unfortunately there are just so many people who are struggling with leadership out there. And so we talk a lot with my coaching clients about, you know, about the talent on your team. You know, the employees who cause problems, who maybe need to be worked out of the organization, as well as the employees who are superstars that you want to retain, right? And that you're worried you'll lose because there's nowhere for them to go. We spend a lot of time talking about the relationship with your boss, which can, you know, even when you're high up in the organization, can often be very fraught with challenges, right? And so what does that look like? And we talk a lot about communication, right? Of how do you effectively communicate your needs, your wants, in a way that is both collaborative and respectful, yet firm, right? So that you are staying true to your values, and protecting including yourself in those values. You know, one of the things that I know I am very guilty of is putting my values out there for others to see, and sometimes forgetting to include myself in the equation, right, of that. So important to do that. So we talk about that a lot. And we talk about work. I'll add one more thing. We talk a lot about work-life balance, which, you know, is sort of this buzzword that I'm not a particular fan of because I think it's sort of a myth. But the only thing I do feel about it is if you want to change the way your time is allocated, let's put it that way, you are the only one who can do that, right? Your company cannot do that for you. You are the only one who can say, you know, I am not spending my time on this. And sometimes that means you have to depart the organization, right? Hopefully not. But this is where that communication of having a conversation with your boss to say, I want to talk to you about this particular function because, you know, it's always at the bottom of the priority list. And I'd kind of like to understand why we still do it. You know, those sorts of conversations are clarifying for you.
I really appreciated all of this. And, you know, when you talk about time management, I watched a program with Warren Buffett, and he said that he gives himself time every day just to think. Now, obviously, he's a genius, but I haven't.
But you know what?
There's real value, right?
I agree with that 100%. Oh, where'd you go? Wait a minute. Sorry, lost everybody for a minute. I agree with that 100%. And that's why when I say when you manage your calendar and your time, if you don't put in time for thinking, right? Somewhere in the day will go by and you won't have done any thinking, right? And if you are, especially as you move up an organization where you are asked to be more strategic, where you are asked to be more analytical, asked to be, you know, more of a visionary, thinking about where are we going, you have got to, you know, if your calendar is controlled by Zoom and other people putting you on meeting invites, you'll never get the time for thinking. So I certainly encourage all my clients, go look at your calendar and go far enough where you find openings in your week, right? And block out time just for you time, your time, whatever you need, right? Because otherwise it'll just get eaten up by other people.
Right, because you're so busy doing. So how about some questions from everybody? You can type them in the chat or raise your paw or whatever. Anybody have any questions for Melinda? Yeah, this is a real quiet group. Okay, if we don't have any questions, I will go back. I have more for you. So here we go. We are all about action in our group, and so
I know you are.
And we're all about creating change. So, what actions for impact are you most interested in, or would you recommend to us in terms of our work, careers, lives?
So here's where I'm kind of sitting at the moment in my life. And obviously, you know, we're all in different phases of life and our thoughts change as we go. So I have been very fortunate to have a tremendous amount of leadership training. You know, corporate America at the time when I was moving up through the ranks really invested in that. The HR department was large and generous and would spend time with you. And there were, you know, programs that certainly as a woman leader, the companies would invest because they wanted more women higher up in the organization. So I was a fortunate recipient of a lot of that, and I'm very grateful for it. And what I learned out of that was the notion that while leadership, there are certain people who are born perhaps with more skills in this area or more skills in that area. For the most part, leadership is learned. It is, you learn it every day by practicing. You can learn it through books, through courses, through programs, through one-on-one mentorship, through, all sorts of channels. But it is in the doing that you learn, right? And certainly when I first started as a people leader, God knows I made every mistake in the book, every single one, right? And now I'm kind of grateful for that, because I learned, I really can't show favoritism to one employee over another. That's not a good idea for how to be a leader. But, again, if you don't have a good role model, you don't necessarily know what good looks like. And so you have to commit yourself to the study of leadership. Where I get a little stuck, and where I'm stuck right now a little, is applying that same thought to the area of creativity, right? If I want to do something creative, and by that, I don't necessarily mean art or music. It could also be cooking, or it could be something in my community, or it could be talking to people, or being a storyteller, or whatever. It doesn't have to be, I'm kind of stuck in the mindset that, you're either born with that talent or you're not. And yes, I know you can develop it. Interestingly, my daughter, who loves to sing but does not have a particularly beautiful singing voice, is taking singing lessons and learning all sorts of techniques for how to be a better singer that I never knew. I just thought you were born with talent or you weren't. And so I'm kind of trying to apply that to areas of my life where at this point, I am looking to be a more creative being. I've been as Marta said, I'm a very rational being. I'm kind of trying to challenge the other side of my brain to be more creative, to put things out there and let people respond to them. It makes me nervous because there's a voice in the head that says, you have nothing original to say, or nobody wants to hear what you have to say, or, oh my God, that is not of quality, right? That our voices can be our inner judge can be so hard on us. So I'm trying to apply the same principles I know about leadership, which is that it's a learned skill made through practice, and apply it to creativity. And that is my current focus
That's great.
on impact.
All right, I have one other question for you quickly. And you had talked about the difference between corporate and nonprofit. And those of us who have worked in nonprofit and corporate know that there are a lot of differences. Can you just speak to that a little bit for those of us who have straddled both camps, so to speak?
Yes. So, oh my gosh, I have so much to say about this. But let me start by saying that the big aha moment for me when I went into the nonprofit that I didn't even realize was a truth for me in the corporate world was that in the corporate world, it's all about profit, right? Every decision is run through a profit model. Will it bring us more profit? Will it make us have less profit? Every decision is clear cut because it's either yes or no. And in the nonprofit world, what I find is that decisions are made on passion, which is far more nuanced and squishy, if you will, than a yes, no answer. Included in that is the challenge on resources in the nonprofit world that starts with wages that are not competitive with other industries, so that hiring top talent is difficult. And then, a business model that in many cases either gets you to a point of deficit spending or financial trouble or difficulty, if you will, that makes decision-making hard. So it's funny because, if you ask a person who worked in corporate their whole life, they'll often sort of poo-poo a nonprofit as, oh, well, you're just people who feel strongly and, you're doing good, but it's not really a business, if you will. And yet I find that the nonprofit sector has so many more challenges than the corporate sector. It is fraught with, interesting things that the corporate people never have to think about. if you will. And so I have tremendous respect for people who dedicate their career to working in the nonprofit sector, because it is, it is a labor of love. You are trying to change our world in ways that is profound. And, nothing makes me more angry than when I see one of those articles that says, did you know the executive director gets paid $150,000? That is absurd for a nonprofit. And I'm thinking, your corporation CEO got paid $94 million last year. And exactly what did you deliver, right? Like, I get so frustrated, even at funders who say, well, how much are you spending on overhead? I don't know enough to keep the doors open and hire talent. How much are you spending on overhead, right? So it's a very different world, is what I will say. And I have tremendous respect. At the same time, the only other thing I will say is sometimes organizations that run entirely on passion get a little too dramatic for me. Right?
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
Sometimes you want to dial that passion down a little bit and get a little more practical.
Thank you. All right, wonderful. Betsy, I'm going to have Milinda answer your question offline, if that's okay. All right. Thank you, guys. I'm going to hand it over to Meg now, our fearless founder. And here we go. Thanks, Milinda.
Thanks, Marta. Milinda, thank you so much. I'm sure part of the reason there weren't so many questions is if anyone was like me, I took like 3 pages of notes, just so you know. And what I loved about them is they are things that I do know, but I tend to forget all the time, when I'm in the heat of the moment. But I jotted down like 8 or 9. So I'm going to share a few of them, which were only just a beginning. I'm sure everybody else had much more even than I did, but I just loved things like the notion of prioritize what you value in terms of time, which is a really interesting notion because we think about it metaphorically sometimes, but don't actually get practical with it. Loved that. Absolutely love that. I did love the radical candor reference of care deeply and challenge directly, because I think that's just beautiful. And it's something we probably all forget. I really loved the notion of share projects that inspire you, because I know we tend to hold those close to our chest when we're so excited about them. We don't always share them out. And I thought that was magical. I loved the notion of understanding the need to build relationships with peers. That can sometimes get forgotten because you're spending so much time above and below and not always horizontally. So I think that was a great reminder. Leveraging your curiosity. That's how I'm framing what you said, which I thought was just fantastic, because that's such an important part of leadership. And I loved that notion. You talked about help people step into their full potential, which of course should be great leaders' jobs always, but that can get clouded with just trying to deliver on the day-to-day, because it gets so crazy.
Yep.
Making time for important conversations. I thought that was beautiful, because that's probably just as true in our personal life as our professional life, that tends to get parked. So I'll speak for myself on that one. So, I loved that. And I loved don't shut down creativity. And I loved that your big challenge for yourself is around creativity, which I thought is fabulous, because there's something really amazing about that continuous learning and expanding your mind and challenging yourself in new ways, that it just makes us all better people, better leaders. I just think we show up in the world differently. So love that notion. So thank you for sharing that. Those were just a little, like, my personal summary of what things that spoke to me, but I just want you to know that you had everything that you said had impact and landed. And so I thought I would share. So Milinda, if we were there, we would all give you a huge round of applause and thank you profusely for sharing your insights and your experience so openly and with such candor. So we're so appreciative of that, honestly. And I felt like actually that list that I just told you, shouldn't that just be like our action items from the outcome of this for this session? They were so sort of succinct and actionable and I don't know, thoughtful. I felt like that could be the beginning. And would love it if others want to throw in some other ideas, and we'll share that kind of list of notions and things that we can actually enact right away, immediately in our day-to-day. So how about that for our quorum challenge, walking away from this session? Let's focus on some of these really important leadership skills. So Diane, I know that we have some really exciting activities coming up soon with Quorum, but Diane's going to be reaching out shortly with information if she hasn't already. She probably is. She's pretty good about reaching out, you know. So pay attention to her emails. But one of the big things that we have coming up is the end of May. There is a Quorum retreat in upstate New York. We have a really fantastic agenda planned, so stay tuned for that. We also have a session in April on health and wellness and nutrition, which is going to be fantastic. And then we also have our date locked in, and more to share shortly on what's happening with the How Forum, which is our big annual event in New York City. So I wanted to remind you of, Diane just put up the dates. Got all those dates there, but you'll be hearing communications. Make sure you get all that stuff on your calendar, because we would love to see you there. And those are really great moments to connect with each other, continue our evolution of leadership, and to celebrate together, which we tend to do all those things. So Melinda, Marta, thank you so much for leading this conversation today. It was really fantastic. And so great to see everybody. Really great to see all these fabulous faces. So hi, everyone. And look forward to staying in touch virtually or physically, whatever works in the future. So be well. Have a good rest of your week.